everyone, and welcome to the first of our UK webinar series. My name is Stephanie Mitchell, and I will be your moderator. Joining us today are Ken Linscott, CSE's Product Director for Domains and Security Services, Katerina Spada, CSE's Head of Accounts for UK and the Netherlands, and finally Tom Smith, who is Regional Director for UK and the Netherlands and will facilitate this session. And with that, I will hand over to Tom.
Thank you very much, Steph. Welcome all. Thank you for joining the CSE webinar series. More to follow on our subsequent webinars, but I'd firstly like to introduce CSE's very own subject matter expert, Ken Linscott. Welcome, Ken. Thanks for joining us today. Perhaps you could give us a brief introduction to yourself and tell us something about your role here at CSE.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Ken Linscott, and I'm the Product Director for Domains and Security Services here at CSE. I've been with the business for over 19 years now, and I tend to spend a lot of time with our customers, educating them around the risks and threats that we see in the DNS space. And that's important because we then have a conversation about how best to mitigate those risks, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today.
So, Ken, there's been a lot of news recently regarding DNS hijacking, and you have a blog series that you've been writing for. Can you give us a brief overview of this?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. There's been a blog series. I think it's actually finished now. It's a series of 6 blog posts entitled DNS, the Neglected Building Block. And I guess the starting point for that was all of the news articles that we've seen since the beginning of this year around DNS hijacking. And this started early in January with FireEye releasing a report, some research that they'd undertaken that talked about a global DNS hijacking campaign. And it was quickly followed by other security and industry experts, Krebs on Security being one of them, with some other research and information to share with people. And it was quickly picked up by the US government and the Department of Homeland Security, who issued an emergency directive about this threat, DNS hijacking. Other governments, including the UK, then got on board and issued statements. We saw ICANN, the regulatory body of the internet, also issued a press release and made some best practice recommendations. And more recently, we saw Cisco Talos, another heavyweight in terms of security, releasing their research and giving a name to one of these DNS hijacking campaigns and calling it Sea Turtle. And this last clipping really, for me, explains where we find ourselves today. It says the wave of domain hijackings, and they're talking here about DNS hijackings, besetting the internet is worse than we thought. Despite widespread attention since January, this DNS hijacking campaign shows no signs of abating. This fits perfectly with CSE's understanding of this. Actually, we've been tracking DNS hijacking attacks since 2012, and this graphic sort of shows the evolution over time. And there's 2 main points here. Firstly, in 2015, we see a sharp increase in the number of reporting DNS hijacking attacks. But at this point, we also see a shift in who's perpetrating these attacks. Prior to 2015, in most cases, it was hacktivists. And they're looking to make political statements, and they can certainly be disruptive. They'll target a brand, they'll change the content of the website, and they will make some sort of political statement. And that certainly has a negative impact on a brand. But in 2015, we saw cyber criminals using this attack vector. And a cyber criminal is looking to steal money and importantly, in this day and age, steal data. And that can exponentially, the harm to a brand is far more. So what I wanted to do in this blog series was actually use DNS hijacking as a starting point because it's very relevant in the news today. But I actually wanted to expand the piece to look at all sorts of risks and threats in the DNS space, because for those who understand or familiar how the DNS works, it's a complex system that has lots of vulnerabilities. So the starting point is this DNS infrastructure is underpinning so much of our businesses, everything from websites to email. It's the biggest workflow tool that any of us have within our businesses. For us, for many of us, we're seeing increased number of our workforce working remotely, and they rely on VPN access. Anyone who's using voice over IP, again, that relies on the DNS. Data file transfers, cloud-based authentication into systems. All of these functionalities that are the bedrock of how our businesses are operating rely on the DNS. And if they don't work, then we see a significant impact in terms of lost revenue and brand reputation. So I wanted to write a blog post that really focused on the DNS. And when I talk about the risks and threats in the DNS, I'm thinking about the threats from third parties taking advantage of the vulnerabilities that exist within the infrastructure. But I'm also thinking about the risks that exist from poor management around your DNS and your digital assets. And when I talk about digital assets, I'm talking about domains, the DNS, and digital certificates. And the last piece, Tom, of that blog post series was really to, once having explained and educated in terms of what those risks and threats are, offer a solution in terms of defense in depth, and defense in depth being a multi-layered approach to protecting against all of those risks and threats, and thereby giving our clients some best practice advice.
Okay, so by all accounts, this is pretty serious, and the increasing number of these type of attacks doesn't seem to be abating. So can you tell us more specifically about these attacks?
Sure. So to do that, I'm going to use this diagram, and I think for many on the call, they'll be familiar with this is a way in which the internet and making a query, how it ends up providing you with the website that you want to get to. The fact that you type in your query into your web browser, it goes to the root DNS, the registry, then the authoritative DNS, and then to the content server and returns the information that you're looking for. So I'm going to use this as a basis for explaining all of the risks and threats. I'll start with the threats because I think that's where the most interest lies. So when we go through this process, the first risk area or threat area from third parties is called DNS cache poisoning. So this is where the information that's cached at the internet service provider has been manipulated or changed by a third party, and that allows them to serve up content that may look like yours but is actually that of the cyber criminal. The second threat area is DNS hijacking. This is what we started with at the top of the conversation, and there are 3 lightning strikes here because DNS hijacking can happen and target 3 different areas within this infrastructure. It could target the registry, but it could also target the registrar's portal, or it could target the registrar's systems and processes in general. And for those unfamiliar, and sorry, I probably should have sort of explained this at the beginning, a DNS hijacking is an unauthorized change of the DNS on which a domain sits, and therefore if that DNS is changed, you lose control of what the content is, or the content that is served up to the visitor to your site, and potentially you lose voice over IP, VPN access, and all those other really important pieces of infrastructure that are running your business. The third type of attack is domain shadowing. It's a form of DNS hijacking in a way, but rather than a change of the name servers, it's a change of the zone file. And again, there's 2 lightning strikes because this will happen at the authoritative DNS level. That's where the zone file is held. But of course, there are companies out there who are using the DNS provided through their registrar. Focusing on the authoritative DNS, there's a whole host of things and risk threats from third parties here. First is a zero-day attack. So, this is where there's a vulnerability that has previously been unknown to that DNS provider, and the bad guys, the cyber criminals, identify that vulnerability and take advantage immediately. This is going to happen, or is most likely to happen, where a DNS provider is using open source software such as Bind, and this is you're familiar with the risk you take if you are not patching some of these vulnerabilities immediately, and the DNS provider needs to be taking the same steps, and if they don't, they leave themselves and you vulnerable to a zero-day attack. The second risk at the authoritative DNS level is malware. So here we're talking about viruses, we're talking about ransomware, and many people don't realize that actually about 80% of malware attacks utilize the DNS that you're using, and they do use that as a command and control. And they do that because malware that is using the DNS, it's really hard to track because you're not looking at every single piece of traffic that is going through your DNS. And it's a way in which these viruses and these ransomware tools can hide. And following on from that, by an extension, we have DNS tunneling. And DNS tunneling takes malware to the next level, and it enables cyber criminals to encode data that they're stealing from your business and use it through your DNS to export that data so they can steal it. The seventh risk and the final sort of threat that we're going to talk about here from third parties is DDoS. And again, there's two lightning strikes. There's one at the authoritative DNS level. Your DNS infrastructure needs to be robust enough to survive a DDoS attack. But of course, all the other servers around your business, your web servers, all sorts of things, they can be targeted for a DDoS attack. So from a threat perspective, in my mind, there are at least 7 vulnerabilities that a third-party cyber criminal can look at to target you via the DNS.
Thanks. So I'm just coming back on something you mentioned there, Ken. You mentioned poor management. How do you mean poor management?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to use the same slide again. So poor management, there's 3 things that come to mind. Firstly, you need the domain name to resolve in order for DNS to work, right? So poor domain management, if you let a business critical domain expire, then you've got an issue. I think that's obvious. And 2 lightning strikes, because that's an issue that potentially can happen at the registrar or the registry, depending on the setup for the extension and depending how you're organizing your domain management. The second area of risk is the authoritative DNS. You may have chosen a DNS provider that does not have an uptime guarantee of 100% or close, or has a reputation or has a history of having outages via all sorts. It might be an outage from a DDoS attack, or it might be an outage because they have engineers working within their systems and they make mistakes and their DNS goes down for whatever reason. And the final risk is around digital certificates. And again, we see this just like important domains lapsing. It's still something that we see on a fairly regular basis. We see the same in the digital certificate world, where a digital certificate isn't replaced in good time. It means that your customers or visitors to your site receive a warning or are told you shouldn't visit this site because we don't trust it. And in some cases, there's evidence that these expired certificates can leave you vulnerable to data being stolen from your business, depending on the situation and the certificate involved.
Okay, useful insight. Thanks. So I think, most of our guests on the line today will probably have the same question. What more can they be doing? What should they be doing in this situation to help their business? Yeah, so I mentioned at the top of our chat about a defense-in-depth approach. So this is simply a multi-layered approach to dealing with all these risks and threats. And I think there are 4 main layers. And I'll start from the top in this diagram. The first being enterprise class provider.
you need to be choosing for domains, DNS, and digital certificates. You need to be choosing a provider that is investing heavily in their systems and their staff and their policies and their processes with security in mind. And not all providers out there are equal, and you do need to carefully challenge your providers and select carefully and ensure that security is top of mind for them. I'll get more into that in a moment. Secondly, you need to secure portal access to every single, you may have multiple providers or separate providers for different elements of these digital assets, but you need to ensure that the access to all of these portals is secure. You then need to have a really good insight as to who has access to these portals and these digital assets and what their permissions are. And you need to consider some of the advanced security features that exist out there for the various different attack vectors. So I'm thinking here registry locks to mitigate DNS hijacking. I'm thinking DNSSEC to mitigate DNS cache poisoning. I'm thinking using HTTPS and digital certificates to secure the interaction on your site, or DMARC to ensure that there's email authentication. And what's interesting about this approach, and there'll be customers of ours on this call who'll be aware that we built something called Security Center and launched it last year. And Security Center was a real revelation for CSE because it gives really good visibility in line with this defense-in-depth approach to our customers and the domains and the DNS and the digital certificates they have. So what I mean by that is, firstly, Security Center identifies a customer's vital domains. It has an algorithm that's smart enough with a 90% confidence rating to be able to identify what are the domains that are most important to this customer. And it then looks at, are they using enterprise class providers? It provides information as to who has access and permissions and elevated permissions to these really important domains. And it highlights where there are these vital domains that don't have some of these advanced security features in place. So, we've designed our service here at CSE to give visibility around this defense-in-depth approach to our customers so that they can make the best decisions that enable them to mitigate the risks that we've talked about, the third-party threats and the risks of poor management.
Very interesting. Thanks, Ken. So I suspect most of our guests on the call are very familiar with choosing enterprise class providers and the importance of investing both in their systems but also their staff. What do you mean specifically by policies, however?
Yeah, so again, a good question, and something that I think that is not talked about enough. So if I take this same defense-in-depth approach, and instead of talking about the solutions that a company can consider putting in place to mitigate risks, and instead think about the policies that CSE have in place to protect our customers under each of these layers, the graphic seems the same, but it has changed. And I see that actually there's a number of policies that we have in place to help our customers. So at an enterprise class provider level, we have two policies that are designed to protect our customers. We have a registrar transfer lock policy. Therefore, where we can, we put a lock in place to make it really difficult for domains to be transferred away. And the logic behind that is it means that domains can't be stolen. We have an auto-renew policy. This doesn't mean that we automatically renew every single domain for our customers. It means we notify our customers of domains that are about to expire, and we give the customer the choice to renew or lapse. But if we don't hear from the customer, we err on the side of caution, and we automatically renew the domain because we know that's the safest thing to do. It avoids us accidentally lapsing a domain that is important to our customer. at the secure portal access level, well, actually CSE made a decision that we are going to mandate two-factor authentication. Usernames and passwords, as strong as they may be, are not enough anymore. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying that we're the only corporate domain registrar that has mandated 2FA, which means that every single customer and every single staff member, if they want to access our systems, they have to provide a username, password, and the code that's generated via the two-factor authentication. We even have policies and processes in place within our customer service teams. So every time they receive a phone call or an email from someone asking to do something, they are verifying who that individual is. They won't take instructions by phone. Instructions have to be in writing, and they will be verifying that that person that has made the request is authorized to request that check. And then most recently, in the last piece around the advanced security features, we've recently launched something called an auto lock policy. And for me, this is really exciting because this is CSE. Security Center was a huge piece of innovation that I think was industry leading when we launched that last year. But giving customers that visibility on and insight into their vital domains, it's enabled us to offer an additional security policy to our customers, and we've called it the auto lock policy. And this is the concept that if we identify a new vital domain for them, then we'll notify them, and we'll say notify them through the system and say we've just identified a new vital domain. It's ticked some criteria that means we think our algorithm believes that this name is really important. We'll then give the customer the opportunity to lock that domain, because in majority of cases, a business will want to put a registry lock, this enhanced security feature offered by the registries. They'll want to put that in place for their business critical domains. If the customer can decide either way whether they want to lock it or not, but if they don't come back to us, just like the auto renew policy, we're going to do what we believe is the best thing to do in the client's interest, and we're going to lock it as a default. And that's really exciting, I think, and that's why we add policy into enterprise class providers in answer to your question, Tom. It's because when you're choosing an enterprise class provider, I think you need to be choosing someone that has these policies in place and is developing and adding policies that can be easily adopted by our customers. Auto lock, I think, is the beginning of this sort of additional policy that CSE will be offering to our customers.
Okay, so just to recap, I see this approach being a mix of identifying blind spots, as completed by the CSE Security Centre, having the right services available to mitigate those risks, but also creating or adopting policies that your partners may offer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone on the call who, the starting point of this is CSE Security Centre, and for anyone on the call who hasn't seen this system, I'd encourage you to contact your strategic account manager or your client service partner, and we'll set up a demo and show you the power of the system. But it all starts with visibility on what your vital domains are and where there are blind spots in your approach to securing these assets. And from there, then that enables you with that insight to decide the approach that you as a company want to take and what policies you want to put in place. And I think CSE's role in this is to help you to decide on what those policies are and help you then to enforce those policies. And that's certainly what we're trying to do.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. Very informative. For the listeners on the line, for those that would like to know more, you can take a look at our blog series at cscdigitalbrandservices.com. If you're not currently using Security Centre and you are a CSE customer, you're interested to know more, please contact your CSE rep and we can arrange a demo for you. So moving on to Katerina, who's going to walk through one of the updated industry updates with regards to the UK grandfathering phase. Over to you.
Great, thank you, Tom. We just wanted to take a few minutes to review the UK grandfather phase, which is ending on the 25th of June. However, please note we have set an order deadline of the 21st of June, just to ensure we've got everything in place that we need to process all the orders. So for those of you that are not aware, 5 years ago, Nominet, who is the registry for .uk, also launched the .uk extension. This has been in a grandfather phase ever since, meaning that the owner of the .uk or the org.uk, etc. version, and you can see different versions on the slide there, has had the first rights to register the .uk version. This is now coming to an end on the 25th of June, and after that date, the .uk will no longer be reserved for the current owners of the corresponding version. So this means that come general availability, which opens on the 8th of July, the .uk version will be available for anyone to register. So therefore, we are classing this extension as high risk, as it's relatively low cost and it doesn't have any requirements. For those of you that have been in the domain name world for a few years now, will remember a similar launch run by .nz, which is the New Zealand registry. We've since done an analysis of our clients' domains in this extension and found that approximately 10 to 15% of domains not picked up at the time by our clients have since been registered by third parties. So we envisage the same thing happening with the .uk extension. Therefore, we are asking our clients to please make sure you review your list of domains that you have the rights to, and to let us know as soon as possible which ones you would like to register. And we can help with a summary of those rights, so if you need any more assistance, then please just contact us, and we'll look to do that in the next couple of weeks before the phase comes to an end.
Great, thanks. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. Just a brief overview of some of the upcoming events and undertaken at CSE. So we have the June newsletter that will be coming out very shortly to all of our global clients. We also have the Global Brand Protection Innovation and the Global IT Security Summit taking place at the same venue in the Crown Plaza in London on the 17th and 18th of June. We also have our brand protection webinar that is will be sent out invites very shortly, for taking place in June the 26th. Subsequently, you'll be receiving an invite into our July edition of the UK webinar series. And then finally, the UK seminar is taking place in September. Again, invites will be sent in due course. So again, I thank you for joining us here today and hope to see you soon.